Okay, welcome back, everybody. Hope you guys had a good lunch break. We are now into the afternoon portion of JAM Day 1. Thank you so much for everybody that's been posting online in the community, in the photos. I've enjoyed looking at your photos over lunch, liking them, taking a look at your icebreakers. That's been real fun. And some of you may have heard or mentioned or heard me mention that we have a viewing party going on upstairs here at BCIT. I was able to pop up there right when lunch began. Looks like lots of things are hopping in the room. And we got a quick video that we're just going to show you what it's like if you want to get a taste of what the viewing room is looking like. So we're going to show that for you right here. All right. So yes, as you can see, they're making good use of the BC Cat Jam playoff towels. You might want to watch out for that because you might see them again tomorrow. At this time, I am pleased to introduce the next session, which is called Simultaneous Enrollment and Letters of Permission. At this time, I am pleased to welcome back Dr. Fiona McQuarrie, BC Cat's Special Projects Officer. Fiona has done numerous research projects for us in the past, and she's here to talk about a current project that she's working on with regards to simultaneous enrollment and letters of permission. Letters of permission are issued by BC Transfer System member institutions to students who are planning to enroll in more than one post-secondary institution at the same time. This session is going to explore the extent and the reasons for simultaneous enrollment in the BC post-secondary system and provide an overview of the policies and procedures that institutions use to manage this process. Just as a reminder, Fiona will be joining us live for questions and answers at the end of this session. So please make sure to put your questions into the chat or the Q&A, and we will talk with Fiona at the end of this session. Over to you, Fiona.
Thank you, Mike, and good morning, everyone, and welcome to this session on simultaneous enrollment and letters of permission in the BC transfer system. I'm Fiona McQuarrie, and I'm the Special Projects Officer at BC Cat, and I'm delighted to have this opportunity to present a research project that I've been working on for the last couple of months. To start out with, I'm going to give you the definitions of these two terms that are used in the study. Simultaneous enrollment is when a student is enrolled in more than one BC post-secondary institution at the same time. And letters of permission are the documents that BC institutions issue to students to facilitate them enrolling elsewhere. There's three purposes to this study. One is to explore the extent of simultaneous enrollment in the BC transfer system. How many students are simultaneously enrolled, where are they enrolled, and what are trends in simultaneous enrollment across time. I'm also going to look at how BC transfer system member institutions manage the process of letters of permission. And based on that and an additional data set, I'm going to make some recommendations for consideration. So first, we're going to look at why students simultaneously enroll. And these are some of the reasons that have been raised in the existing literature on simultaneous enrollment. Sometimes students are unable to attend classes at their own institution. This may be because they've moved or because a class is full and they can't get a seat in the class at their own institution. They may want to finish their program or their credential more quickly, and one way to do that is to take classes at other institutions. They may not be able to take the course at their own institution because they've taken the maximum number of repeats for that course. They may want a course that isn't even offered at their own institution, but is still applicable to their program. They may want more flexible course structures. They may want courses with different ending dates or starting dates, or courses that are self-paced that they can complete at their own speed. And based on information from their friends at school or from online sites like Rate My Professor, they may believe that a particular course is easier to take or to pass at another institution. So some of the general findings from this previous research are, one is that simultaneous enrollment is a strategic choice. Students don't do it by accident. It's something that they consciously plan to do. And because of that, they also tend to be very well-informed students. They know how the transfer credit system works, and they know how to use it to gain the outcomes that they desire. Students may have higher GPAs before they simultaneously enroll, although this may depend on the specific course and also on the reasons that the student is taking the course. The timing of simultaneous enrollment may affect the outcomes in the courses that they take elsewhere. The research, which is primarily out of the US, shows that most students simultaneously enroll in the first or the second year of their program. This may be simply because there are more articulations at first and second year, or it may be because that's when students want to acquire extra courses or have the flexibility to acquire extra courses before they get into this more specific study of the third and the fourth year of a program. And students who simultaneously enroll may be more likely to acquire a credential. This is sort of self-explanatory because if they're taking more courses, that puts them further along their academic journey towards program completion. So this is a methodology that I used for the study. I collected 3 data sets. The first was data on simultaneous enrollment in BC. This was data from the Student Transitions Project that is provincial. I also reviewed BC Transfer System member institutions' websites. I was looking for information that is available for students who want to simultaneously enroll. And I will clarify here that I was looking for information from the institution's own students wanting to enroll elsewhere, as opposed to information for students at other institutions who wanted to come and simultaneously enroll at that institution. I also conducted a survey of registrars and transfer credit staff at BC Transfer System member institutions to see what their policies around letters of permission and simultaneous enrollment were. And I'm going to discuss the findings from each of these 3 data sets separately. Okay, for the first one, the Student Transitions Project data, one caveat to keep in mind here is that this Student Transitions Project data does not include students who enrolled simultaneously at private and public institutions, because private institution students are not included in the STP data. But from approximately 20 years of data, it was obvious that simultaneous enrollment as a percentage of overall enrollment has declined across time, and the number of students has declined across time. And this may be because over that period, more institutions in BC received approval to grant degrees, and also the range of programming at most institutions has expanded quite a bit. So it may be that there's less simultaneous enrollment because there are more opportunities for students to take courses at or programs at their own institution. Another thing that the Student Transitions Project does is look at what they call pairs, which is what are the 2 types of institutions that students are enrolled in at the same time. And these are the 3 most common pairs. And what's interesting about this finding is that teaching intensive universities only represent about 20% of enrollment in BC post-secondary overall, but they're part of all 3 pairs of enrollments in simultaneous enrollment. I should note too that the Student Transitions Project does not determine a home institution for students that are simultaneously enrolled, because there may be reasons why in a particular semester a student has taken more courses at another institution than the one that they're intending to gain their credential from. So the process of simultaneously enrolling for students. So first, at most institutions, the student has to request a letter of permission. from the institution. This is usually issued by the registrar's office. And it shows that the institution is aware of the student's plan to enroll elsewhere, and it also guarantees that the institution will grant transfer credit for the course that's taken elsewhere. The LOP request is approved. I'll talk a bit in a minute about reasons for approving and denying these requests. The student then applies for admission at the other institution. They usually have to meet that institution's admission standards and any prerequisites for the courses they plan to take. And once a student has completed the course, then they usually are required to provide a transcript, an official transcript from that institution to their home institution to guarantee that the credit that they acquired elsewhere is included on their student record. So looking at the data from the institutional websites that I collected, there's one BC transfer system member institution that does not allow its students to simultaneously enroll. So I looked at 39 institutional websites. 19 of them had information on policies and the process of issuing a letter of permission. Most of them required that the student has to request the letter of permission in advance of taking the course. The student can only take the courses that they have identified in their request. Usually the student has to be in good academic standing and not owe any fees to their institution. And the other institution must be recognized or accredited by the student's own institution. Of those 19 institutions with website information, 13 of them have standardized letter of permission application forms. Most of them also make students aware that there are institutional policies such as residency policies that may affect whether courses taken elsewhere are applicable to the student's program. The student will receive transfer credit for the course, but they may not be able to use that credit towards completing their program. And then there are some other requirements that may or may not be present depending on the institution. Most commonly, these are that to be eligible for a letter of permission, the student has to have completed a certain number of credits. It ranges between 15 credits and a year's worth of credits. They must have a minimum GPA in their most recent semester of study. Usually this is a C grade or higher. The letter of permission is only valid for a specified time, which could range from this next semester to the next year. And some institutions also have restrictions on that forbid students from taking certain courses or courses in certain disciplines at other institutions. And we can look at all of these as a form of safeguarding to ensure that students who are simultaneously enrolling have the academic preparation and the academic background that is going to maximize their opportunities for success in courses at other institutions. The final set of data came from a survey of BC transfer system registrars and transfer credit staff, and responses were received from 30 of 39 institutions that were surveyed. There was no clear pattern of where students were applying to take courses elsewhere. Some of the research literature suggests that students are more likely to apply to take courses at other institutions that are geographically close to their own institution, but that didn't seem to be the case in British Columbia. And part of that may be that Thompson Rivers University and Athabasca University are the most common institutions for which LOP requests are received, and both of these have primarily online programming. And so it may be that students are looking for opportunities to take courses elsewhere online rather than taking them in person. The majority of letter of permission requests are accepted. The reasons for denial include that the course is not transferable, the course is not applicable to the student's program, or the student's reason for their request is not acceptable to the institution. Examples that were given is asking for a letter of permission because tuition is less expensive elsewhere, or because the other institution is geographically closer to the student's home. And most students, if they ask for a letter of permission, they take the course. It seems to be relatively rare that they don't, and this reflects the finding in the literature that students who simultaneously enroll are doing that strategically. So what does all this tell us? Well, one is, as we saw from the Student Transitions Project data, that simultaneous enrollment is a relatively small part of BC post-secondary enrollment overall. But from an institutional standpoint, a student taking a course elsewhere has financial implications for the student's own institution because the institution is losing the tuition fee that the student would pay if they took the course there. And students taking courses elsewhere also have implications for course timetabling, course scheduling, and also for faculty and staff and resource assignments. So one issue that was raised by several of the respondents to the survey was, are letters of permission really necessary? And there were different viewpoints on this. Institutions or representatives of institutions who felt they weren't necessary pointed out that BC has a very well-developed, extensive, mature transfer credit system. And letters of permission are somewhat of a barrier to students taking advantage of the opportunities that are available to them through that system. Those who felt that letters of permission are necessary seem to feel that they're important because they are a way for the institution to monitor simultaneous enrollment elsewhere and potentially control for any problematic enrollments that were taking place for the wrong reasons or that were having an impact on the institution's own capabilities. So the recommendations based on the data that I collected. First, institutions may want to look at whether they feel that letters of permission are appropriate or useful for them. As I just pointed out, there are varying viewpoints on whether letters of permission are necessary or they should be required. And institutions may want to look at their reasons for requiring or not requiring letters of permission and see if those fit with their intentions and their strategic direction. For institutions that do require letters of permission, a standardized procedure is very important to ensure that all students understand how the process works and the requirements that they have to meet to be able to undertake this opportunity. And part of standardizing that is also making it publicly available, making the information accessible to students, making sure they know where it is. Some respondents to the survey mentioned that they have relatively few requests for letters of permission, but that may be because their sense is that students don't know what letters of permission are, what they can facilitate for students, and how to apply for them. Along with that, clear criteria for approval or denial of requests. One thing that came across very clearly in the survey is each request is specific to a particular student and a particular course. So a strict yes/no list may not be appropriate, but to give the students who are applying some idea of what are acceptable or unacceptable reasons for asking for a letter of permission. And part of having this process in place should also be having regular monitoring of simultaneous enrollment to identify potential issues. For example, are students taking a particular course more often at other institutions than they are at their own institution? And why is that happening? And also to look at student performance in the courses that they are taking elsewhere. If students are taking courses elsewhere and not achieving good grades in them, maybe that's an issue with the criteria that they have to meet to get a letter of permission. So regular monitoring can identify those sorts of patterns and provide the opportunity to take action to address them. So thank you for attending the presentation. The report that this is based on should be published within the next couple of months, and I'd be more than happy to answer questions about it. Thank you.
Okay, and now it is my pleasure to welcome Fiona McQuarrie, who is here standing by to answer your questions. I see we've got a few in the chat, so I am going to dive right in. Just a reminder, make sure you throw it into the Q&A or the chat. I'm looking at both, so I'll do my best to get to all the questions. And we'll start here with a question from Andrew Wilson from ONCAT. He's asking, were there any recommendations for letter of permission application costs?
No, because most institutions in BC don't charge a fee to apply for a letter of permission. There are three who do, and there's one, and they're minimal fees. They're between $5 and $10. There also is one who only charges a fee if the course that's being requested to be taken at the other institution is not already in the BC transfer guide.
Okay, so a bit of an articulation fee in some ways, in some ways.
Mhm.
Okay, we have Adrian who has a question. Were there any issues for students in student loans with regards to simultaneous enrollment? So were there any implications for student loan eligibility as far as you know with regards to taking courses on a letter of permission?
I didn't see anything on any of the institutional information that I reviewed that gave any cautions to students about their student loan status and how that might be affected by courses taken simultaneously. So the honest answer is I don't know, but I will say that having said that, that I didn't see any information that indicated it would be a problem.
All right, so we have a question from Annalee Bolton from University of Canada West. Hi, Annalee. Good to see you online. You have a question around how is full-time status considered if a student is taking two courses at their home institution and one course elsewhere?
As far as I know, the full-time status would depend on how many courses they're enrolled in at the institution.
Yeah, I mean, I think that'd be a good question to throw out to the online audience here is how is that handled? So
Mhm.
many times student loans or full-time enrollment status is tied to how many courses you take. But if you're spreading those courses around, how does that get proven and does that have an impact? If you've got some thoughts on that, please feel free to throw that into the chat. We'd love to hear from you.
Yes.
I have a question from Kathy Newman. Did the survey show if or how many institutions had a fee for the letter of permission? So you just mentioned, I think you said two or three. Is that correct?
Three have a very small fee, and then there's an additional one that only charges a fee if the course is not already in the BC transfer guide,
Right.
which I assume is based on the assumption that they would then have to request articulation, and that's a expenditure of resources that would be needed.
Just maybe a question of my own, because that makes me wonder about people that are taking courses at the upper level, so third and fourth year. Did you have any data or find any trends with regards to students taking upper level courses on letters of permission?
The student transitions project data didn't specify the level of course that someone was taking. The US data that I looked at and the US research indicated that it tended to be first and second year courses, but that may also be an artifact of the reality, somewhat as it is here, that the majority of articulation agreements are at the first and second year level. So the simultaneous enrollment at those levels may follow that trend.
Okay. Another question here from the audience from Tabitha Smith. Have you seen any trends on letters of permission from international students?
No, I did not see any information on that at all.
Okay, all right. I do see I have a comment here, probably in relation to my previous question. Students can request a split enrollment letter for financial aid purposes so that they can still show full-time status by combining the credits taken at two institutions. Thank you, Marnie. That is appreciated context to our discussion. Appreciate you putting that into the chat. All right, taking a look through the questions here. I have a question here around can students enroll in more than two BC post-secondary institutions at the same time?
They can and they do. It's a very small amount of the overall yearly enrollments and simultaneous enrollments. It's in the most recent calendar year, I believe it was less than 100, and most were enrolled in three institutions, but there actually were one or two that were actually simultaneously enrolled in 4 and 5 institutions, which is quite mind-boggling to me. But I guess if they figure they can do it, they can handle the coursework, they can do it.
Yeah, and I imagine with the prevalence of online offerings, which really greatly expanded, obviously during the pandemic, that opportunity to swirl around and take courses at many institutions is theoretically possible.
Yes, yes.
Your work, did it look into the method of delivery of courses for when students are taking courses on letters of permission?
No, it didn't. But one thing that I did notice when I was looking at the survey data is that the assumption, I think, in the past has been that most of the simultaneous enrollment would be where institutions are geographically close to each other. And of course, in BC, that means the Lower Mainland, where we have more than a dozen post-secondary institutions. But the data that I collected through the survey didn't seem to indicate that that was the place where most or all of the simultaneous enrollment was happening. I think also because the BC transfer system includes Athabasca University and Athabasca University and Thompson Rivers University, which are both primarily or completely online, that there's more opportunity for students to take transferable courses at other institutions that are online courses.
Another question here we have from the audience from Kathy Cameron. Is it a safe assumption that students applying on a letter of permission have met the program admission requirements? And if so, she's curious about the requirement of some institutions to ask students to submit an English proficiency test. Do you have any insight into the admission requirement, meeting the admission requirements for taking a course on a letter of permission? And are they also required to take an English language or demonstrate English proficiency?
That's a really good question. They would have to meet the institutional admission requirements at a minimum, I believe, to enroll in another institution, and that would presumably include some measure of English language proficiency. As far as program permission, I think it would really depend on the institution where the courses are being taken, because there are a number of institutions that have an admissions category for students that are taking credit courses but are not enrolled in a program. So if the course that the student wanted to take was in a program, but they didn't meet the program requirements, if they were in that category, I assume they could probably ask the department head or the instructor to waive the prerequisite. It's hard to answer that question in a general sense. I would think it would really depend on the particular course and the particular program and how willing the receiving institution would be to override requirements if needed.
Yeah, so I think maybe that's a good way to punt that question back to the audience. Why don't you tell us if you are at an institution, if your institution waives admission requirements or English language proficiency requirements for students who are only seeking to take a course on a letter of permission. You can let us know in the chat if you've got some reflections on that. We have another question here from Mohammed Belaid. I hope I pronounced your last name correctly. In some countries, they don't allow letter of permission to grant credit for exit level subject courses, as each institution wants to control its own quality assurance. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, there are, again, this is where individual institutional policies might come into play, because at some institutions and in some programs, there are requirements such as the capstone course or the practicum has to be taken at that institution. So presumably a student could take a course like that elsewhere and transfer the credit, but the credit might not be applicable to their program completion. So I hate to keep saying it depends, but it would depend on the individual institution and program's policies.
All right. Adrian has a question. Were there any issues for students with student loans with regards to simultaneous enrollment?
I didn't collect any data directly from students, so I don't know.
Okay, all right. Just taking a look at the chat. No, Mandy Brooks says no, they wouldn't waive any requirements for students on an LOP. Students still have to meet entry, English, and prerequisite requirements. So that's the that's the way it works at Alexander College. Thanks for putting that into the chat, Mandy. Appreciate that contribution to the chat. Priscilla Stone from VCC also says they would not waive admission or prereq requirements. So appreciate that being added as well. Some institutions won't grant letters of permission to students wanting to take courses in specific subjects or wanting to take specific courses. What do you think some of the reasons might be for those restrictions?
I'll say first that the survey data showed that the three most common subjects where institutions would not grant LOPs, and I'll say also this was a small subset of the responses, were commerce or business, math, and English. I think there's a couple of reasons why institutions might restrict courses in particular subjects being taken elsewhere. One might be that they would like their students who are graduating with their credential to have those courses taught at that institution as a form of quality control. Another might be if there's a historical pattern of students taking, as I mentioned in my presentation, taking a course or a subject elsewhere because they've heard that it's easier. I think the main reason, though, is probably quality control to ensure that subjects or topics that are critical to completing the degree successfully, that the institution would like to ensure that they have taught the student and they have ensured that the student has met the passing requirement for the course in their own context.
Since most of the published research on simultaneous enrollment was conducted in the US, what differences between the US and Canadian transfer systems do you think might affect the outcomes of simultaneous enrollment in Canada?
I think one is that in the US, there's a much larger division between two-year institutions and four-year institutions. That the two-year institutions, the community colleges, generally don't have the mandate to grant four-year degrees. Most of them grant associate degrees. But I think there's a stronger division in the post-secondary system between the two. I would say too that in the US, I'm trying to think how to express it, that there's more of a stigma associated with two-year institutions, that they're somehow inferior, or they're the place that people go if they can't get into a four-year degree granting institution. And I don't think we have that same sort of division in the Canadian post-secondary system. Another difference that I noticed in the published research is were based on simultaneous enrollment that the institutions themselves had set up. There were students at a community college could simultaneously take courses at a university or vice versa through a formal agreement rather than having to seek out a letter of permission and essentially make that agreement themselves. And there are a few programs in BC where there's simultaneous joint enrollment within the context of a formal program, but they're relatively rare. So I think the US is there are more of those formal agreements for simultaneous enrollment. I think the closest parallel that we have in Canada, in the BC context at least, is dual enrollment with high school students and post-secondary institutions.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. Did you encounter any examples of situations where an institution would refuse a letter of permission because they wanted the student to take the course within their home institution? When you take a look at tuition fees, and they can be quite differential depending on the size and location of the school, you could, probably find a way to save some money by taking courses elsewhere from your home institution, which maybe that could result in some revenue loss for institutions. Did you find any information or data that might support a reason to not give a letter of permission because of financial reasons?
There were a few institutions that listed that as one of the reasons why they might deny a request for a letter of permission. I didn't see any that said that they would, that was a firm, no, we will not grant a letter of permission on this for this reason. I think part of the challenge in studying this is that pretty much every letter of permission request is different, and every student's reason for wanting to take a course is different. And there could also be situations where, say, if a student has had to move to a different region where tuition is cheaper, but they have to take the course there because they can't take it at their home institution. So the tuition saving is sort of a benefit, but it's not the main reason why they're applying to take the course elsewhere.
Yeah, I think that makes sense, and there could be many legitimate reasons why students are doing this that are not just about strictly motivated by financial. We have a question from Betty Lee. Can students in the university be approved to take online courses from another two different colleges?
In the BC transfer system, yes, they could take, if their institution approves the enrollment, they could take an online course from a college or an institute or any of the universities, as long as their institution approves it.
All right. Well, I think that I've gotten to all the questions that are in the chat. They appear a little out of order, so if you see me looking down, that's because I'm scrolling through to try to make sure that we answered any questions. If I didn't get to your question, though, I do apologize. Do let me know, and we'll try to follow up with Fiona. But I think that we are at time, so I want to thank everybody for the comments and the questions in the chat. You've also given us some answers to questions that we had for you, so really appreciate that from the online audience. Thank you, Fiona, for this presentation. I guess the final question for you from me is because you report to me, so I'm waiting for this report. When is this report going to be finished?
The first complete final draft is almost finished, and I'm hoping to bring it to the TAC meeting in January for approval.
Okay, so we can look for a publication sometime in the new year. Really appreciate that. Thank you, everybody, for your questions online. We're going to take a quick break. It is 1:37 p.m. We will be back at 1:45, where I will be welcoming my colleague, Dr. L. Ting, who is going to play a game of Spot the Difference with you. You'll want to come in and join us at that time. We'll see you then.
Thank you, everyone.